Pokemon Go is no ordinary game. It was not intended to be a game that you could just boot up and play for hours on end from the comfort of your own home. Instead, the game's mechanics require you to venture out into the real world and visit landmarks such as buildings and parks in order to visit in-game locations such as Pokestops, as well as catch wild Pokemon. The game encourages and even requires exploration throughout the real world in order to advance within the game. And unless you've been living under a rock, you're probably aware that this game's mechanics make it the antithesis of the life many of us have learned to live during the COVID-19 pandemic. So why am I talking about a game that requires you to go outside, walk around public places, and talk to strangers in a time where it is highly encouraged to do anything but that? It's because Niantic, the game's developer, reported that in 2020 they saw a 34% increase in their active player base in one of their most profitable weeks since the game's launch. To find out how this was possible, I reached out to the game's community, did some research, and reflected on my own experience with the game to discover how Pokemon Go dealt with the pandemic and what that says about the video game industry as a whole. This is Catch 'em All Without Catching the Virus, an analysis of Pokemon Go during the COVID-19 pandemic. Before getting too deep into Pokemon Go, I think it's important to take a look at gaming as a whole in 2020. Despite the problems faced by so many industries in the past year that were caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, gaming has skyrocketed. Games such as Animal Crossing and Among Us saw unprecedented success that was directly caused by the worldwide response to the pandemic. Just look at Among Us. It had 500 million users in November alone. This was caused mostly by the fact that many people used video games as a way to socialize. Superdata reported that in 2020, about 27% of Americans played video games as a way to stay in touch with one another. Of course, I'm talking about conventional games that are easily played at home, unlike Pokemon Go. However, Pokemon Go also saw great success despite being such a different type of game. In 2020, the game saw its highest single week of revenue since the game's launch week in 2016. According to the mobile application analytics company Sensor Tower, the game generated $23 million during the week of March 16th. Of course, this means that significantly more people were playing. But why? And more importantly, how? To answer these questions, I spoke with a player that goes by the name Swolesparce, who is very active in the Tucson Pokemon Go community and runs their Discord server. Swolesparce said that one of the additions to the game that embodied the changes made because of the pandemic the most was the remote raid pass, an expansion made to the game's raid system.
It was a two-step process. First, they implemented the remote raid pass, where any raid you could see on your screen you could join, and then a few months later they added invites. So if you couldn't see it on your screen, you could now join somebody else's. So that is a uniquely pandemic sort of thing.
More simply, Niantic changed the rules of the game. Not only did they make it possible to play from home, but they encouraged it too. As the year went on, Niantic continued to release events that brought Pokemon to the player instead of the player having to go seek them out until COVID cases receded around the world. Once they did, these events reached a climax on February 20th, 2021, with an event called the Pokemon Go Tour Kanto. In this event, which I participated in, Pokemon Go returned to its roots by including challenges that required you to visit public spaces and interact with strangers to trade specific Pokemon in order to complete quests. It was the first event of this nature in Pokemon Go since the beginning of the pandemic. And for me, it was one of the first times I willingly sought out conversations with strangers. I was skeptical at first, but I was thrilled to realize that most other players were wearing masks, and every player I encountered was conscious, even verbally making sure I was maintaining the 6 feet of space between us. The most important aspects of this event that Pokemon Go capitalized on are what Jason Chukit Tham and DeAndre Smiles referred to as two of the most common themes derived from their research on the game. This is found in the book The Pokémon Go Phenomenon, Essays on Public Play in Contested Spaces. In it, they say that respondents to their studies revealed that, quote, Pokemon Go has served as a catalyst for these players to explore and investigate public spaces around them in a way that may not have happened otherwise. The second theme is that of creating new connections among strangers based upon the simple act of playing Pokemon Go. The use of these themes that made the game so successful in the first place, in conjunction with the new additions to the game, are something that Swolesparce says will help the game in the future.
Long term, I think it's going to help it. Short term, obviously, there's a noticeable dip in activity, but I think it allowed the game to implement concepts that long term are going to improve its functionality, its playability, and really its marketability towards people. It kind of forced their hand and forced them to make updates that, you know, they have said they're going to continue post-pandemic. They're going to make slight modifications to the remote raid system, but that is now a permanent fixture. And I think a lot of what they did is going to have a positive long-term effect, but of course, you know, in the immediate, you know, there's not as many people playing in spite of what they've done. So
it becomes quite clear that Niantic understood the acceptance of these additions from fans like Swolesparce. It's especially clear that they embraced them in ads like this one featured on TikTok. However, for some fans, Niantic's additions just weren't enough to justify continuing to play the game. I spoke with a player called JaBluemage, and they told me that the events of the past year, combined with working from home, caused them to lose interest, despite the additions made to the game. Additionally, they felt that their free time was just better spent elsewhere. And for some players like JaBluemage, they were simply just bored of the game. But for other players, the additions made to the game were quite upsetting. And this may seem confusing, but these fans have been asking for features such as remote raids since the game's launch. The reason for this? These players have physical disabilities that limit their playing experience with the game. In a 2016 interview with Julia Alexander of Polygon, Steve Spawn of Able Gamers, an organization and charity that campaigns for the inclusion and accessibility for players with disabilities, said that for people suffering from diseases like cerebral palsy, playing Pokemon Go is extremely difficult. He said, quote, "The developers could have removed some of those barriers on the virtual playing field and still protected the core concept of the game. Of course, some of those barriers have been removed in response to the pandemic and are now included in the game, but some fans argue that it's too little too late. But for others, like myself, the removal of these barriers made me want to come back to the game. This game is not my favorite of all time, nor do I think it's the best I've ever played. It has issues, such as having ableist tendencies and favoring players in big cities. However, with that said, few games have had an impact on my life in the way that Pokemon Go has. I've played video games all my life, so it was only natural that I relied on them so heavily during the pandemic. However, unlike my hours spent with Call of Duty Warzone and Hades, the hours spent on Pokemon Go took me to a different state of thought. Whether it was when I was walking around my parents' neighborhood in the early days of lockdown, or when I was trading Pokemon with masked strangers 6 feet apart from me on my college campus, I felt normal. I felt, even for just a few minutes, that maybe everything in our world wasn't so bad. I met new friends in the real world and rekindled relationships with old friends because of Pokemon Go. In a weird way, this game gave my life purpose again. During a time where nothing in the world seemed to make sense, and thanks to Niantic, many other people feel the same way. And of course, this is an academic piece, but it's important, especially in terms of studying video games through critical and cultural approaches, that we consider the feelings and emotions of players like myself. In doing so, I think video game scholars unlock the potential to understand why games are such an important aspect of contemporary life, both in terms of the pandemic and a non-pandemic world. Ultimately, the story of Pokemon Go in 2020 is not a success story. Instead, it's an adaptation story. It illustrates what happens when video game developers have to adapt to the status of the world and the needs of its players. Additionally, though, Pokemon Go's ability to adapt is a result of what's in its name: Pokemon. Pokemon is one of the biggest brands in the world, and it's established itself as a powerhouse in the entertainment world. I think that this is best understood in the words of Randy Nichols from the book How to Play Video Games, where Nichols says, quote, "A critical examination of the Pokemon Go franchise allows us to look beyond rules, players, and representation to better understand how production, distribution, and corporate relationships are integral in crafting a profitable, long-term global media property. Furthermore, Pokemon Go demonstrates how video games are a new type of entertainment medium, one that can change on the fly in order to best suit its consumers." As a video game scholar, I unfortunately can't tell you much about what lies ahead in terms of the pandemic. But what I can tell you is that regardless of what's going on in the real world, video games such as Pokemon Go will continue to adapt to the world. And for players like you and me, it's going to continue to be more than just a game. Thanks for watching.